This is Democracy Watch. So, Mark, the special purpose grand jury report that recommended indictments in Fulton County has been released. There are some names in there of people whose indictments were recommended, but that ultimately weren't charged, like Lindsey Graham, who is obviously a big focus of this whole thing, as well as Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue. Can you explain why some of these people whose indictments were recommended weren't ultimately indicted?
Yeah, so first of all, this is a blockbuster. I mean, just take a step back and think about this for a second. You have on that list three United States senators who were U.S. senators at the time. One of them, Lindsey Graham, still a senator. Two of them now former senators. But think about it. We're talking about now 2 months or a few weeks even before the special election for Senate in 2021. The two Republican senators on the ballot were involved in conduct that this special grand jury thought should lead to indictment. And Lindsey Graham was as well from South Carolina. So this is a blockbuster. That's before you get to Cleta Mitchell and the other lawyers. Why weren't all of the people on that list included? We don't know. There are a few possible reasons. Number one, Willis's indictment includes a lot of people, right? So at some point, the number of people that you are indicting becomes a practical limitation for you being able to bring justice in a timely fashion. And let's not lose our eye on the ball here. The people who were indicted were serious players in this alleged criminal racketeering enterprise, including the former president of the United States. So that's one reason. The second is we don't know which of these people may have cut a cooperation agreement, right? Some of these people may have been immunized. They may have cut a deal. We just don't know that yet. Number three, there have been some people who have been speculating that it might have to do with speech and debate immunity or something like that. I think that that's less likely. I mean, this is a very aggressive, sophisticated prosecutor's office. And we have seen members of Congress indicted in other cases where experienced prosecutors get around that. But it's possible that again, in a very broad and sweeping case, the prosecutor here was trying to keep this simpler. And then I guess number four is we don't know what's yet to come, right? What we have seen are the indictments we have from Jack Smith and from Fani Willis, but we don't know what else either or both of them may have in store.
Well, the general talking point among, I guess, the pundit class is that it must be nice to be a U.S. senator. So do you think that Graham's position as a U.S. senator and Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue's positions as former U.S. senators, do you think that played into the decision not to indict? And I ask because at the same time, we do have someone like Donald Trump, who was the president of the United States, who himself was indicted.
Yeah. So look, I hope not. I hope that, the saying that prosecutors use, they're going to follow the law wherever it leads without fear or favor. And certainly there, by all indications, this prosecutor in Fulton County went after the president of the United States. So she seems to be walking that walk. So I have to imagine there are other reasons for having not brought the case against those others. And look, there were other people who she didn't indict as well, who were not former senators, some of whom we can talk about. But it is going to always lead to the question of whether or not a senator from South Carolina who had no business, I mean, think about this, had no business meddling in or involving himself in the proceedings in Georgia, it's always going to raise that question, and that's unfortunate.
What is the downside to indicting someone whose conviction might not be as certain as other defendants? Can that have downstream effects if the case against Lindsey Graham, for example, wasn't as much of a home run as it is against the other co-defendants?
Yeah, look, that's another reason why she may not have brought the case, right? She may have just concluded that the evidence wasn't as strong against some of these other folks as it was against the people she indicted. So that is, I should have included that on the list, and that's a list. And no prosecutor wants to indict someone only to see them acquitted. It can have effects both in the case itself, right? I mean, think about it. You're a jury who's deliberating against, 5 or 6 defendants, if the evidence is weak against one of them, it can have effects about how they view the entire case against the others. So that's one reason. But the second is, in a very high profile case involving, the integrity of U.S. elections and election subversion and efforts to undermine, the results of the 2020 election, certainly none of these prosecutors are looking for acquittal. So strength of evidence could be a piece of it. Though, the racketeering statute in Georgia is pretty broad in allowing you to tie various pieces together. So that may have been part of it, but I don't know.
Mark, is it unusual for a special purpose grand jury to recommend indictment for someone who the prosecutor then ultimately decides not to charge?
So look, special purpose grand juries are not usual.
Right. It's a very Georgia-specific phenomenon.
Yeah, I mean, you could argue that the very fact that Fani Willis went through that process was an additional safeguard that are not afforded to a lot of defendants who just get indicted. I don't know that it is usual or unusual. I think what it shows, and where I think it should be sending chills through the blood of the people who were indicted, is it shows that Fani Willis actually did distinguish between people. So if you're a John Eastman and you're seeing that Cleta Mitchell didn't get indicted, you're not feeling better about your case today.
Yeah.
If you're Donald Trump and you're seeing that Lindsey Graham didn't get indicted, you're not feeling very confident about your case today, right? Because it shows that, in fact, she did exercise this kind of discretion and didn't just throw everyone in.
Yeah, that's a brilliant point. Does the fact that Graham and these others weren't indicted likely mean that they won't be indicted at all for their actions in Georgia?
I think it probably means that they won't be, but it doesn't guarantee it, right? I mean, I think I think that Fani Willis brought the case she brought, which is, again, against a large number of defendants, big case, and she's got her hands full with that case. I don't think that there is going to be an immediate other case. Whether Jack Smith, we keep hearing these things about Jack Smith's investigation still looking in other places, and that would make more sense. Federal government's got a lot more resources. Special counsel, the Department of Justice has virtually unlimited resources if they need it. So, we'll see. But I think for the time being, I wouldn't expect an indictment against Lindsey Graham.
Well, to that point, if prosecutors, be it in Fulton County or the DOJ, if they didn't want to taint this trial, for example, with someone like Lindsey Graham or David Perdue or Kelly Loeffler, who may not be home runs, could they bring about charges in a completely separate trial when their presence won't have an impact on the other defendants?
Yeah, I think that's possible. I think it's more likely, though, that if they were to bring that case, and that's an if, right? I think for right now, the cases we have are the cases we have. But I think the other risk that people, some of the pundits are not focused on is, we talked a lot about when the original cast of characters are indicted in Georgia, that many of them won't wind up going to trial. They will plead out. Well, when you plead out, what do? You typically offer the government cooperation against others. And it is not always just others of people who have already been indicted. Sometimes it is cooperation against people who have not yet been indicted. So, a John Eastman, and I have no reason to believe he's going to plead out, or the other lawyer, Clark, right? Like, they could decide to plead out, and who knows what cooperation they or some of the fake electors, like, who knows what cooperation they could offer, and maybe that would extend within the current indictment, but it could also lead to other indictments. Again, that's speculation. Don't know that's going to happen, but it is certainly, let's put it this way, it is never good news when you are listed in a special grand jury report as someone who the grand jurors thought should be indicted. It is definitely not good news when you are a U.S. senator or a former U.S. senator in that position, because prosecutors, I sometimes say this about the public integrity section of the Department of Justice. They're not interested in prosecuting fake electors. They're interested in prosecuting elected officials. And so, anytime a senator or a former senator has been involved in conduct where, it's in this ambit, it's not good news for them.
You had mentioned at the top that one of the reasons that these people might not have been indicted was because they may be cooperating, and we don't know. Is there a point at which we would know, or is this something that could be under wraps forever?
No, it would be disclosed as part of the discovery process if they were cooperating with the federal government. You know, for example, if they testified before the grand jury, or they were interviewed, or they got a grant of immunity. All of that, frankly, at this point, probably has already been disclosed to Donald Trump. That was some of what we saw fought out over the protective order. If you remember, a few weeks ago, the government wanted to make sure that information was not used in a retributory fashion against witnesses. And the same is true in Georgia, right? Fani Willis is going to have to provide to Trump and the other defendants information about her case. Who was interviewed, who entered into cooperation agreements, who may have testified voluntarily against them. And that information will presumably eventually become part of the public record in a trial or in other legal proceedings.
Okay, and let's finish off with this. Legal implications aside, what are your thoughts on the fact that 3 current or former Republican U.S. senators were recommended for indictment beyond the raft of other Republican officials in this state? Like, what does it say about the state of the Republican Party right now?
Look, today is a profound day in American democracy. I'm not sure that it will be understood as such, but this is a big moment. You know, think about what we learned today. What we learned today is that it wasn't just a rogue president, right? We knew that because there were 19 other co-defendants. It wasn't just a handful of lawyers who were unindicted co-conspirators for Jack Smith, or some of whom were indicted in Georgia. It wasn't just some fake electors, right? What the list that we saw today come out is that the scope and the breadth of the scheme that ordinary citizens in Georgia who comprise these grand juries, that the breadth of who they thought there was probable cause to recommend an indictment included the far-reaching portions of the Republican legal establishment, the Republican political establishment. You know, John Dean told Richard Nixon that there is a cancer on the presidency. Ronna McDaniel, if you're listening to this, there is a cancer growing in your party. It is not just one man. It is not just a handful of people. And unless the Republican Party is able to deal with that, the way in which they dealt with it in the early 1970s, there may not be a Republican Party for much longer.
Well, we'll leave it there. Obviously, for every Lindsey Graham and Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue, we have people like you and the folks who are on your team who are helping to defend democracy every day. So thank you for what you do. For anybody watching, if you want to support Marc and his team, make sure to sign up for Democracy Docket. It's a news outlet that he founded that focuses on everything voting in elections. The link is right here on the screen. It's also in the post description of this video. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
I'm Marc Elias.
This is Democracy Watch.